Our next storyteller is Christopher Gillis. Come on up.
A guy once told me that buffalo teeth are supposed to give you courage. Well, that guy's full of shit. When I was 17 years old, I saw a movie called Risky Business. It changed my worldview. At 17, my sister was about to graduate from college, and my parents considered themselves empty nesters now. And they would leave me home alone. And on one of the trips, when they were leaving me home alone, I was watching Risky Business. If you don't remember the story, it's about a man named Joel, Tom Cruise. He is learning to be an entrepreneur. He's a good kid, and he's trying really hard to do all the right things, and he's also very horny. A friend who's trying to help him resolve his growing anxiety about the future tells him 3 letters. He says, "What the fuck?" You know, just go out there and do something. Now, my parents, they would leave me home alone, and they would leave me what I would call a peasant's wages, just enough money to live off of for food. However, I would not be taking those Hamiltons and going to McDonald's. I took them over to the sporting goods store, and I said to myself in this moment is, what the fuck? And I bought an airsoft gun. And about in a tub this big, it was 10,000 rounds of plastic airsoft BBs. At the time, I was living in Northern Virginia, and it was 2002. So that meant we were about a crow's fly from the Pentagon. It was also the time of the DC sniper, and I had just bought myself this thing that looked like a real gun, and I wanted to play with it. And I knew shooting it in the backyard would be a bad idea. Someone might call me in as the next DC sniper, if you remember that. So I bought a little target and had a net on the back so it would catch the BBs. I'm like, oh, this is a great idea. I put it inside my parents' entertainment room. I also went through scavenged through all my father's things, because that's what I did as a curious young man. Much like Joel, turning up his receiver on his dad's speakers and playing the music and dancing to old-time rock and roll with no pants on. However, I didn't dance, but I still didn't have pants on because I was home alone, and I took this airsoft gun and I did diving while shooting in the entertainment room. If you can imagine any of those gung fu movies, that's what I imagined myself as at the time. And airsoft BBs, they're little plastic BBs, and they like to bounce, unlike the metal ones. And I didn't know that at the time, and I was still learning how to shoot, so these would ricochet all over the place. One of them actually ricocheted and knocked down my father's 1988 commemorative World's Oldest Rodeo poster, and the frame smashed. And it was actually, when I fell on the ground, the ground was littered with BBs because I had 10,000 of them. And by the time I was done shooting all these BBs, I went to go pick up the target, and I didn't realize that the net would actually ricochet because I was shooting at 150 FPS, feet per second. It's amazing that I didn't shoot my eye out at the time, but but it ricocheted against my father's entertainment center, and he had this entertainment center from Germany. In fact, my father worked in the military, and we traveled around a lot. And he bought this entertainment center when I was 1 year old from Germany. Oh, sorry, I was about 2 years old. And he carried it around all these places we moved. And it looked super expensive, too. I thought it was a lot of money because it was huge. And I put the target at the bottom shelf. That's back when they used shelving to put your VHS tapes in. And you put it in, close it so you couldn't see your tapes, because my dad was also a clean freak. The ricochet marks put me into a frantic state. There are just these little indentations on the wood. I was in a frantic state because how many people do you know have a signed birthday card from the President of the United States? That's my father. My father, the reason we were living in Berlin, I just found this out a year ago, is my father was an interrogator and handler for spies. Berlin Wall stuff. My father also addressed the Pentagon once a week on counterintelligence. My father knew how to interrogate people for a living. My father was also a clean freak. And there are 10,000 BBs on the ground and this damaged, expensive German wood. So I ran to where my father keeps his tools. I grabbed tools, and I grabbed the sandpaper, and I start sanding the German wood. And I start thinking about that movie with that great advice that said, "What the fuck?" And I said, "I'm really fucked right now." And I start praying to the gods of carpentry as I'm rubbing on this expensive German wood. And then all of a sudden, as clarity comes, and I look down at what I just did, and I see particle board. I wonder why I have an ulcer today. I run back over to my father's tool area, and I grab the lacquer, and I take the lacquer, and then I paint it on. It's like, heck, you won't notice, yeah? You won't notice at all. I had to drive my parents to the airports, and that required them to actually call me to remind them because they're always afraid that I'd forget. They called me 24 hours before I was supposed to pick them up from Reagan International Airport. At that moment, I decided to come clean, and I told them right there on the phone of what I did. Luckily, that gave me 24 hours for them to digest this information. Now, as I spent the next 24 hours cleaning the house and trying to make everything look right, much like Joel in Risky Business, if you remember, the prostitute stole all his furniture and he had to buy it all back. And he's frantically putting it back in the house. And that's me cleaning the house. And putting all my dad's tools. Also, I took out all his pornography and handguns, and I had to put those back in the closet too before they came home. I picked them up from the airport, and I was starting to feel pretty good because my parents weren't mad at me. We get home, and they're still not mad at me. I had taken the time during my frantic stage of fixing things. I fixed that rodeo picture frame. However, the glass was shattered, but the frame still looked okay, and I hung it back up. Dad gets home. He doesn't notice the frame. He doesn't even talk about the furniture because he's mad as hell that I forgot to water all his houseplants. As well as being a super spy, my dad was an amateur plant lover. What is the word for that? A botanist? Botanist? I don't know. It sounds odd to me when I say it out loud. But yeah. The advice I have for you today, friends, is don't forget to water your plants.
Thank you, Chris. Uniquely, Chris has been collecting Michael Myers masks since he was 12 years old. And there may be a connection there. I don't know. Dad, CIA spy, Michael Myers, knife. I don't know. It's just the way my brain goes. So I couldn't tell you. At age 3, he fell from a chair, which led to a serious injury in which he bit his tongue off. We just saw that on the TV show last night. We were watching, what the hell was it? What's that medical show? The Pit. And one of the people kind of thing. It was like, yuck. Anyways, the good news was she was hammered out of her mind, so she didn't really feel it. So, and It was surgically reattached, as obviously this is because he's here talking to us and not, you know. But he chewed off the stitching and it had to be reattached again. So when you think of having a bad day, okay, think of that one, you know, that works that way. Thank you all for coming.